So we have now a selection from a longer book called the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are a document from American history. They come from the debate over the current U.S. Constitution. The United States declared their independence from England and organized themselves in a different way, and only later adopted the current constitution in the federal system, where the different states are independent to a degree but united under a single common government. And the Federalist Papers were originally a series of newspaper articles directed at the people of one state, New York State, so that to try to persuade them to accept the new Constitution with increased national power, increased federal power. And the act of persuading the people of New York was similar to talking to members of all of the other existing states at the time. The states had to vote on the Constitution, and a supermajority of them, 3/4 of them, needed to accept the new Constitution for it to go into effect. So this is part of the political argument for the day, but it had a narrow focus, but then a more general interest. Other people wanted to know what these James Madison and Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, the various authors of these individual papers, said about the Constitution. And there's a high status to these papers even today in the United States, that people look to them to understand what the Constitution means, and for understanding the principles of government that were behind the formation of the current United States. Uh, they have a quasi-official status, and they're not official documents like the Constitution itself, but they do come up often in court cases, and judges will look to the Federalist Papers if they want to understand the principles of the Constitution, settle some certain question that comes up. You probably know this word, federal, and then federalist, the abstract adjective, from our national politics. That the federal system was thought to be at least possible to let the different parts of Iraq live with each other in a mixture of unity and independence. You can see a tone in this book that it defends popular government against presumed enemies. So it was written at a time when there wasn't the opinion there is now, that democracy is simply the highest form of government, or the sensible form, that all modern places are democratic in one way or another, and that it's simply known that this is the best way to organize yourself, that people who don't do this are tyrannies or somehow backwards. And this, I think, is a good way to explore the question. Things written under the assumption that the conclusions are true are often worse arguments. The authors don't have to work as hard, and they don't argue for fundamental principles against contrary opinions. And that may be good as a practical matter. Right? Maybe it's good that we just take it as a given that organizing a nation so that everybody gets a vote and power is widely distributed. Maybe it's good we take that as a given, that that's the best way to organize a government, that that's the way to go, and that's the most practical and effective in the modern way. Maybe that's good, but that's not intellectually good. You never really understand a thing unless you can feel the arguments for its contrary. So It helps, if you are in favor of a democracy, to know why monarchy, having a king or a queen, is in its way a good form of government. And if you can make a good argument for that, then you can really own and understand and make yours the arguments for a democracy. And if other forms of democracy, or other forms of government rather, that are not democracy just seem foolish or misguided or simply not the way we do things, then I think it's unlikely that you will actually understand what democracy, popular government, is good for. So this is an argument that visits first principles. And there are three terms that I've been using, all jumbled up, and it might be good to distinguish them. There's democracy, and then there's the republican government, the government of a republic, and then popular government. Now, popular government is the common term. This means that everybody gets a share of power, and it's widely distributed. As far as possible, people are not shut out of control of their own lives. Democracy and republican government are two different ways you can be popular. Democracy is the form of government where the people just have power directly. And republican government, then, is a form where there are representatives. The people have some power, but don't simply vote on whatever they want, don't control things as a group, but are at one step removed from power. The people have the ability to elect representatives, and then the representatives have the power and run things. And it's a big part of this argument that Madison accepts the general concern with popular government. He feels that the complaints against it, that it's unstable, that it's impulsive, that it's apt to break apart into faction and civil war, and simply not very constant, that it, as a majority government, represents the medium talents, the middle talents, and not the high talents. That it's slow. All of those complaints about democracy, Madison feels and thinks they're just in some way. So part of his cure for that is to be not in favor of democracy, but in favor of republican government. So that should be part of your background in understanding this reading. Object of Federalist number 10 is the problem of faction in government, and particularly in popular government. And then faction is a part, and the problem is simple. The parts tend to be partial, that is, they favor their own interest, or perhaps are taken up with some passion or enthusiasm, and maybe a sectarian religious opinion. They believe certain things or adhere to certain truths not apparent to everyone. A faction is a part of government, and it has a partial view, doesn't in a reasonable way look to the common good that includes all parts, but either because it's too taken with its own beliefs of what the common good might be, ignoring other points of view, or it isn't really concerned with the common good at all, but only with the good of its part. For those reasons, faction is a great danger to all governments, and particularly popular governments, where the factions can form and reform a modern state which is based around the idea of progress. People will be free to make money. They'll invent new ways of living and manufacturing things. It's only natural that would have different factions. But then there's a great danger to faction, that if the parts are not dedicated to the common good, then the state is in danger, and the whole may break up. And Madison is aware of a common wisdom. Democracy is an unstable form of government. So the direct democracies of the past, the famous one in Athens in ancient Greece, never stayed the same for long and did not make good decisions because they made decisions in common. So Madison is aware of that difficulty, and his general argument is to say that the Republican form of government proposed by the U.S. Constitution can solve this problem, whereas the more directly democratic current organization of the United States before the Constitution that it has now was bound to be a victim of that problem. And his way of sorting this out is to say that there are two different ways to address the problem of faction. And in one, one works, and the other may work too, but the cure is worse than the disease. So let us look at that.